I want to bring in NBC's Monica Alba, who is in Anchorage for us, NBC's international correspondent Keir Simmons in London. Ivo Daalder served as the former U.S. ambassador to NATO and is senior fellow at the Harvard Belfer Center. And with me here in studio, Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and is an MSNBC international affairs analyst. And Monica, we referenced that red carpet rollout. Walk us through the stagecraft behind this summit.
Well, typically, Ariel, for a meeting like this of world leaders, it would be so highly choreographed down to the second, down to the step. But there's still a lot we don't know about how this is going to unfold today, which is really striking in and of itself. And that's because, though we know, obviously, they have a goal of discussing a potential path to peace and ending the conflict in Ukraine, there's very little else known about what these two leaders may discuss, what they may walk away with, and how it all might shake out. And the president is putting the chance of failure from the American side at 25% here, that these talks collapse, are derailed, or don't produce in the results he wants to see. And he said that if they do, then there will be what we expect is a smaller leader meeting with those interpreters in the room. Then they will broaden out to some larger delegations that will have a bilateral working lunch. And then again, depending on the direction of these discussions, there could be a joint press conference between Presidents Trump and Putin. But President Trump, for his part, said that if he doesn't like what he's hearing, then he would just go out and potentially do a solo news conference and then head back to Washington. But his goal, he said, is to try to get to a place where they can set the table for what would be the next meeting here potentially, which would include Ukrainian President Zelensky, who, of course, right now is not a part of the talks that are scheduled here in Anchorage. But the president has said he would love to do that, even stay here potentially if that were a possibility, though that seems really difficult just at this point. We'll see how that goes. But of course, the relationship between Presidents Trump and Putin is such a highly scrutinized one. It has gone from immense flattery and praise to now some expression of disappointment and frustration, which we've heard. And here's how the president sized up what he views as President Putin's thinking going into this conversation. Listen.
He's a smart guy, been doing it for a long time, but so have I. Been doing it for a long time. And here we are, we're president. That was much more difficult than what I'm doing today, believe me. So we get along. There's a good respect level on both sides. And I think, something's going to come of it. I notice he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia. And that's good. I like that because they want to do business, but they're not doing business until we get the war settled.
When he mentioned those economic advisors, it's notable if you look at the manifest on the American side, the Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, they are going to be joining the president as well. So there could be these broader talks. Russia's certainly interested in talking about more than the conflict in Ukraine. But also what we're really watching for here, Ariel, is this idea that the president a few days ago told European leaders he wasn't going to be talking about territorial swaps or the potential for that with President Putin. Now he's saying, yeah, it might come up, but we won't make any promises, guarantees, or decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine. Ariel.
All right, Monica, thank you. Ambassador McFaul, you've been obviously following President Putin for a very long time. You heard our president there saying there's mutual respect on both sides here. Does Putin respect Trump, and would that be enough to push some progress here?
I've been in presidential summits with Putin when I worked for President Obama. I don't think the word respect is one that is in his vocabulary. He's not thinking in those terms. He's thinking, what am I getting out of this meeting that's good for me, and in his definition, that's good for Russia? And already, it's a big achievement. Already, he's meeting with the most powerful person in the world. Already, he's meeting with the president in the United States, and that photo op is already a big achievement for him. What happens after that, I think, is secondary for President Putin. He is in no hurry to do a deal on Ukraine. He thinks time is on his side. And secondly, as you just were talking about, he wants to expand the aperture of this meeting. He's bringing these people, I know them all, who work on economics, who work on trade and investment, because he wants to make this about U.S.-Russian relations, not just about ending the war in Ukraine.
So trying to distract from what's going on the battlefield, trying to bring it into the economic sphere. Ambassador Daalder, 2 weeks ago, Trump threatened sanctions. We're talking about the economics of this. If Putin doesn't dial down this war, we've seen Putin only ramp up the violence. Now he's getting this optics out of the summit, probably a bit of a victory for him at home. So where do these conversations start?
Well, they'll start with a discussion about how to end the war, and I think it's going to be an interesting tango between these two leaders, because clearly what President Putin wants is to delay and try to shift the conversation to the issues that Ambassador McFaul talked about, the bilateral relationship and the normalization of a relationship, and he's looking to find out what's the price he needs to pay for that. And President Trump is going to look for some kind of signal that Russia is indeed willing to move the war to a new phase, and therefore in some ways look for a ceasefire. I would not be surprised if there were an agreement to halt the long-range strikes on cities and energy products, energy facilities, that's something that Putin would be willing to do while maintaining the pressure on the battlefield, and see President Trump say, you know, I've almost ended the war. This is a great deal, and now we can have business as usual with Russia. That would be a huge win for Russia, and frankly, not a very good outcome for Ukraine or indeed for security in Europe, which is what this should all be about.
Here, Trump said today he would discuss territorial swaps. You heard Monica reporting on that with Putin, even though he told European leaders and President Zelensky that he wouldn't do that. Does this set off alarm bells in Europe and in Ukraine, even if Trump says Ukraine would eventually get the final word here?
Oh, I think that unpredictability will be jangling nerves in European capitals, here in London, where I am, for example, and in Ukraine, inevitably. I mean, one of the comments that President Trump has made on that flight on his social media was about a conversation that he just had with the president of Belarus, President Lukashenko, who in that post President Trump describes as a highly respected world leader, when many describe Lukashenko as the last dictator in Europe. So that kind of mood on the part of President Trump, that kind of thing will worry people. Another aspect of this, I mean, of course, you mentioned at the top there that the Kremlin is saying the meeting could take 6 or 7 hours. I think that's what the Russians would want. You might think that a conversation about a ceasefire could, frankly, last 2 minutes like this. Will you agree to a ceasefire, President Putin? No, I won't. Conversation over. And of course, that's not how it's likely to, way it's likely to go. Now, I will say this, that we did speak to this morning to a former Russian official with close ties to the Kremlin, who says that don't be surprised. It's just as you guys were saying, don't be surprised if the Russians, if President Putin does try to give some kind of a small gift to President Trump, like, for example, agreeing to a week-long ceasefire, maybe a air war ceasefire or something of that nature, in order to try to shift things forward. Don't be surprised if the Russians are prepared to agree to some kind of formulation that says, well, we agree to talk about sanctions and trade somewhere down the line once the situation on the front line is resolved. You know, all of that may be possible, because all of the whole conversation that we're having is a conversation that is likely to be happening inside the Kremlin. They know very well, a number of the people in the Russian delegation know America incredibly well, and they know very well where President Trump is, and they are going to try to shift things, aren't they? That just is inevitable. Not least because they will want President Trump not to storm out of this meeting, not to say, well, I can't negotiate with this guy, and impose the kinds of economic measures that President Zelensky has and the Ukrainians are pushing for, and say that's what you need in order to get the Russians to at some stage, agree to compromises.
All right. Ambassador McFaul, to that end, you have kind of witnessed, and we've all seen these two men on the world stage at least 6 times, the G20, of course, in Helsinki. This is not Trump's first interaction with Putin. Has he learned anything from his previous experience? And to Keir's point, could he be baited by those concessions, those smaller concessions by Putin?
Well, I really hope that he and his team studied the last major summit, which was Helsinki in 2018. That was a complete disaster. There was nothing good about that for American national interests. And I think the president looked weak because he accepted Putin's talking points that everybody knew were not true, that the Russians did not interfere in the 2016 presidential elections. And that's what I worry about when they get one-on-one. Putin's good at those meetings. I've been there. I've seen. He's a tough interlocutor. He knows his facts. He knows his version of history. And what I hope, at a minimum, the president doesn't get committed to some talking about land swaps that he is not authorized to do. It's not his land. It's Ukrainian land. And therefore, something more minimal, just like my colleagues were talking about, some baby steps forward, I think, is the best possible outcome.
And Zelensky's not even able to maneuver those land swaps, if I'm understanding that correctly from their constitution.
You are absolutely right. It's a constitutional issue and it's a democracy issue. He just can't agree to that. And therefore, any talk of that somehow locks President Zelensky in for the next meeting would be a really bad outcome. I hope the president doesn't make that mistake.
So, Ambassador Dalder, Trump